So for those who did not see the video on reverse gaslighting, let me begin by saying I was really excited to get that idea. I had a client who in a video I call, I forgot. Now I'm going to call her Stephanie because it's not a real name. And she is clearly a self-love deficient or a codependent. And she clearly was in a marriage for 25 years and until the death of her husband, who I believe had narcissistic personality disorder, she was oblivious to this guy's pathology. She didn't really see that he was doing anything wrong. But yet, when I asked her about their relationship and asked pointed questions, she was able to say how she felt alone and how he was self-centered and all of the, what I would call the telltale signs of a codependent, pathologically narcissistic relationship. And it just took a while for her to see what up to that point had been invisible. So you guys know, and hopefully, that my ideas, my theories, my self-love recovery program is based on the premise that if we are a self-love deficient person, a codependent person, we brought our relationship template, our experience and the way that we adapted to the experience of being raised in a traumatic, dysfunctional family home by a narcissistic parent and a codependent parent. And that trauma kind of galvanizes, comes together and creates this idea of what a person is most familiar with, the type of person and type of love they're most familiar with, what feels comfortable and safe and what doesn't. And so someone who is an SLD or a codependent, they became an adult SLD because of this relationship template that pointed them in a direction that it feels safe and familiar to be with a narcissist and anxious and unsafe with a healthy person. So that's the basis that you can best understand my work on the human magnet syndrome. Then I go on to say in a separate part of the book, and by the way, here is the book. Then I go on in a separate part of the book to explain gaslighting. And this is one of, as you probably know, so I don't have to like boast about it, but I created a lot of new ideas, concepts, theories, and explanations to help people better understand their self-love deficit disorder in order to resolve it. And that, and so I discovered, and I remember I was pretty excited when I discovered this, that gaslighting, a person who is an SLD who was in a relationship with a narcissist, there's a couple things that are almost always for sure. One is the narcissist gaslighter has sociopathic traits or is a sociopath. In other words, they know what they're doing, they do it planfully, and they don't have empathy or remorse for that. They're not oblivious. They're doing something specific. And so what I figured out is that any adult SLD who has suffered gaslighting in their adult relationships was gaslit as a child from their narcissistic parent. And in other words, they learned that in order to survive this tumultuous, dangerous family environment, they could not anger or activate or trigger the narcissistic parent with their injury, the narcissistic injury, and they had to mold themselves into a certain type of person that would be pleasing, enjoyable, and non-threatening. And by being open to giving up what could have been your own emerging personality, they survived a much worse potential than a child that didn't. And so if you think about it, the narcissistic parent needs someone to love them, to adore them, to fulfill their narcissistic and grandiose beliefs. So that's basic narcissism. And a child who is like, personality-wise is like a piece of clay. If a child knows that if she or he should be patient, smart, talented, athletic, whatever the narcissistic parent needs, quiet, then they are seen as the good child. And as a result of a whole childhood like that, they learned that love requires you to push down what you really want and to be someone else. So if you look at that, then it's pretty clear that gaslighting is a predictable experience in what I call the cauldron of one's the cauldron of one's attachment trauma experience, that they had to become what they thought the narcissist wanted or what the narcissist wanted them to be. So that's gaslighting. Gaslighting is when someone manipulates you to think, behave, or have a problem that you didn't have, but they trick you, they manipulate you, they change the environment to prove to you you have a problem. And once you believe it, then you start becoming it. So if you look at it that way, the child who's going to be a future codependent or an SLD believes, identifies with the personality type that the narcissist needs. And to do that, they have to disavow their, what I would call their natural self or healthy self narrative. Okay, so then we now understand the connection between what I call the original gaslighting and how it becomes, how it morphs into adult codependency with a person who is vulnerable to adult gaslighting. And then gaslighting, adult gaslighting, we've talked about, and I'm sure you know what it is. But then with this client of mine, going back to the beginning, and I forgot her name, Sandra. Actually, that's the name I used in the video. I think the first one, we'll call her Sandra again. By the way, if I have a client named Sandra, this is not you. I picked a name that I thought would be, I would have no chance of someone thinking it was them. And I remembered, oh, shoot, I have a client named Sandra. It's not you. So with this client, she kept telling me how good her family was and how good her dad was and how many problems, how little problems they had. And they sat down, they had family meals. Mom loved dad, dad loved mom, the kids loved each other. And she could not think of any problems, any dysfunction. And so that confused me, because either I'm completely wrong, about everything I believe about SLDD codependency and how it is caused and where it comes from, or I'm missing something. And of course, I don't think I'm completely wrong. So I investigated further, and I just kept asking her questions. And then first I did is we found out about that this perfect, nice marriage of hers was not perfect, and that she was completely oblivious to obvious red flags, symptoms, and traits of pathological narcissism, grandiosity, entitlement, easily angered, selfishness, all the things that we understand about narcissists, and that it hurt her. And that took a while to get her to see. But when we went, because a part of my treatment program requires my client and I to go back and match up their relationship with the narcissist to their history in relationships with narcissists to the childhood and the attachment trauma. We went back to her childhood. And again, as I said before, she had no problems. And I kept pushing. When I say pushing, prodding nicely, supportively. And I kept seeing these red flags for what seemed wrong. Like, I'd ask her, did your dad ever hurt you? Well, no, not really. Did he show love? Oh yeah, we used to do things together. And then I'd ask, so what would you do? And she would tell me, and I go, and when you did those things with your dad, was he next to you? Was he supportive? Was he kind? Was he emotional? And she had no. Did he sound and feel like someone who just loved you just because of you? She goes, not really, but I knew it. So, and I challenged her and I said, so when you were with your dad, he demonstrated no affection or regard for you, but since that's all you had, then I can see why you would see that as love. And so then I would have to give her an example of what is considered normal within, limits on both sides of, somewhat not great or too good of, a normal parent-child relationship that has nurturing. And then she started to say, oh yeah, dad didn't have any of that. And then I said, well, did you ever upset your dad? Oh, not really. And then one session, she remembered this event where she did something with her dad, and she did something wrong. And she said her dad turned on her viciously, like an animal, and started screaming at her, and it scared her because up until this point, she had not disappointed him. So that was his perfect opportunity to say, okay, you said your dad and you loved each other, that you had no problems. But what I see is that as long as you were with your dad in a way that made him happy, then you enjoyed yourself with him, which really only meant is you got to do what you want to do, but you were always kind of independent of him, even in these moments that your father was not nurturing. He was not supportive. He did not ask questions about what you like, all of the traditional ways that parents show their love and interest. And she goes, no. I go, well, it sounds narcissistic to me. Then I started asking about her relationship with her brother. And they said, oh, yeah, we get along. And then I found out that they'd never really talked. They didn't know each other. And that it was a dysfunctional relationship because dysfunction can be what people do badly or harmfully or what they don't. Just the same with you can be disassociated and show no outward mental health problems because everything is buried, or you can be associated. You can be easily triggered and activated, yelling, screaming. Both are equally severe psychological problems, except one is internalized and one is externalized. And I started to explain that, it seems to me that your problems with your family were all swept under the rug, and that you might not have had any outwardly observable problems, but if you knew more about mental health, you would have known how distant, cold, and antiseptic all of your relationships were. And then so we talked about her mom. So yeah, mom and I were great. And then I dug there and I found the same, peculiarities, irregularities, red flags about something that wasn't right. And then one day she comes to me, she goes, oh my gosh, I had this memory. And she remembered that she was in college and she got incredibly hammered. And she was 18 years old. And like I'm going to be judgmental. Oh, no, actually, I'll be nice. Any 18-year-old that doesn't think well and has poor judgment, she drove completely drunk to her dorm, parked her car on the grass, not on a parking lot. I think she threw up in her car, had throw up on her sweatshirt, just passed out and went to sleep. And the next day, her parents gave her a surprise visit and they woke her up. And she said, I had to look like I had a hangover. They had to know. I mean, because I was just sick and I felt like I was green or something like that. And I just was nauseous and we went out to breakfast. But they didn't say anything. And of course, I didn't say anything. And then she said, and she was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just remembered this. She said, they went to my car. They reparked it, correctly, and they cleaned it out. And she put it together. Her parents knew that she was, and she's 18, inebriated and dangerously drunk, and enough to worry any parents. They didn't say anything. They cleaned the car, they cleaned her up, and nothing was mentioned. And that was the moment. That was the moment when I came up with the idea of reverse gaslighting. So if gaslighting is the systematic, methodical approach by a pathological narcissist to trick a person into believing they have a problem for which they don't have it, and then keep tricking them to show that this problem is getting worse and worse, and this person believing it for the purpose of isolating them, tearing them down, so that they would be more in need of the narcissist and more disconnected with their outside world. Okay, so that's gaslighting. Reverse gaslighting is the same thing, but the narcissist tricks everyone into believing there's no problems. They manipulate them and to show everyone loves each other, everyone's okay, and that we didn't have any problems. Mom and dad didn't yell. That wasn't trauma. And so that fits, I would think, maybe 10%, and I'm guessing 10% of all SLDs, because all SLDs have attachment trauma. The ones that I meet that think, oh, we had a great family. My mom and dad loved us. We had clothes, we had food. My dad went to our games. He was my coach, my mom. And they go, I'm just sorry, but there's no dysfunction. And so that's where the reverse gaslighting idea came up. So that is what the video was about. I'm sure I added something new or different in what I just talked about. And if you guys have any questions about that, I will take about 10 minutes of questions. If you are interested in any of my educational resources, which are far different from my YouTube videos, they're very they're filled with details. They're video seminars that run between 4 to 6 hours. They have very detailed handouts, but we have a self-love recovery. I created February 9th or 7th, can't remember, but it's on our website, Self-Love Recovery Day, Self-Love Day, Self-Love Day. And so we now we're calling that our holiday, and for a little while we're having 30% off on anything we sell on the site. Okay, so I'm looking for questions that I will know because of a question mark, and I'm now scanning and I'm not seeing any question marks, which Shannon says sounds like me early on as a child, the golden child. Now that I am an adult, I am the scapegoat. Is that typical situation with narcissist codependent? First of all, Shannon, this whole thing about empath, that's a candy coated term. Please, I'm imploring you to not identify with that, because that is a positive spin on a serious problem. An empath used to mean someone who is highly empathetic, who can feel and sense someone's feelings and problems. And that is a good thing. It's a good thing. It's neither pathological nor is it healthy. A person who is codependent, or what I call self-love deficient, that's not a good thing. And the people that call themselves empaths, they are codependent, they are self-love deficient, and they suffer. And all SLDs, codependents, they are extremely empathetic. But using the term empath, it just makes you feel better for a problem that is pretty serious. So, so your question is, now that I am an adult, I am the scapegoat. So is that typical with situations with narcissistic codependent parents? Absolutely. So the narcissist in a family, and let's say it's your dad, it could be your mom, needs someone to fill their empty bucket of pleasure, self-esteem, and it's a bucket that has holes, so you never no matter what you put in, it's always going to come out. And so they choose the person who is most capable of making themselves feel good about themselves, making them feel good about themselves. And in my family, it was me. I was my dad's favorite. I idolized him. We spent all the time. He was my best friend, and we were friends, which is kind of weird. And then I became a teenager, and I just grew up to like have an opinion, and I just wasn't easily swayed. So we argued, and I fell from his grace, and my younger brother picked up the chalice or the baton, and he became my dad's preferred person, and I was a problem person. So yeah, that is normal in a family. Okay. Please, if you don't have any questions, I will consider this a great conversation because I got a chance to teach you guys more about the video. So I'm looking for a question, and if I don't get one, well, let me. We'll just call it a good session, a good time, and hope that it helped you. Please, if you want more information about what I do, the services I offer, the educational resources, and the healing resources that I have, go to selfloverecovery.com. All right, guys, as usual, it's a pleasure talking to you. I hope that you learned something, hopefully a lot in this discussion. I hope you understand how gaslighting is tailored for codependents or SLDs, and that the type of gaslighting I call reverse gaslighting that is meant to make you feel like you have no problems could be just as harmful. All right. You be well, and do take care of yourself. Bye-bye.